This is why you can't simply just manage a team. You have to lead it. You can't manage somebody into having a high morale. As a leader, can you not change your plans when you don't have that immediate feedback and things are going tough? That's boldness, to persevere. It usually has something to do with exploiting the inherent uncertainty of the world. What you need is cooperation across your team. Cooperation requires an objective, a common objective. If we're surprising our enemy, we have to capitalize on it. We have to be ready to exploit. Well, how often do we focus on our opposition's strengths instead of their weaknesses? You run the team so hard that they can't continue. You start to lose people. That's the culminating point. It's easier for the enemy to give in to you. So you can't always be on the offense. You're going to eventually run out of power. And the last thing is, even though somebody is at the tactical level, it can have strategic implications. What dilemma can you create for your competition that they can access? And the hardest level to understand is the operational, which is in between. And that is what links your fights to objectives that eventually get you to your strategic aim or goal. Chapter 2, Theory of War. Chapter 1 of Warfighting, we talked about the nature of war, or what are those immutable aspects of war. In Chapter 2, we talk about the theory, or how do we prepare for and wage war. And again, you might ask yourself, why do I study warfighting? The dynamics you experience in business or life in general closely resemble those that you're going to find in war. Time competitive environment, opposing wills, and we live our lives in some level of uncertainty, most times. This is why we study warfighting. The chapter starts out talking about war serving the highest level aims of a nation, or the policy, the strategic goals of a nation. Meaning we don't fight just to fight. We're fighting to accomplish something. The goal of the fighting is larger than fighting itself. What are the highest level goals that your organization needs to achieve? Are these worth fighting for? In fact, the book goes on to say that this is the single most important aspect of understanding the theory of war, is that it serves a higher policy. And war has a spectrum of conflict, from low level to high intensity, all out war. So we adjust our level of intensity to suit the situation at hand. The next part of the book talks about two types of strategies. One is a strategy of annihilation. Annihilation, as you can see, is where we seek to destroy our enemy totally. It doesn't necessarily require physical destruction, but it's total destruction nonetheless, in that the enemy cannot resist any further. We do things directly or indirectly that prevents them from being a threat to us. And the second strategy is called a strategy of erosion, where we do things to our enemy that helps them convince themselves that resistance is no longer worth it. There's no knockout blow. Rather, there's a sustained wearing down of the enemy's will to fight. The essential question is the enemy willing to pay a price that high to continue to resist? And you succeed in a strategy of erosion when the answer is no. It's easier for the enemy to give in to you. You present them with a situation they cannot accept. What dilemma can you create for your competition that they cannot accept? The means to wage war include all elements of national power, to include military force, but they also include diplomacy, trade, economic sanctions, and even just the threat of action. You see this when we put ships off the coast of a country, a demonstration of our force, our ability to fight. Similarly, your organization has many tools at its disposal. Are you always relying on the sales team? Are you always relying on the project management team? Are you always relying on your operations folks? It should be a combined effort, capitalizing on the strengths of each to bring about the best and most productive result that you're looking for. The spectrum of war, like I alluded to, you have a lot of tools. It doesn't always need to be all-out destruction. You have to have a graduated response to the situation. And that's one thing that makes the Marine Corps unique, is they're able to operate at the low end as well as the high end. They're able to deploy on ships and be globally mobile, show that demonstration, that threat, and they're also able to get in there toe-to-toe and slug it out in high-intensity combat. Your goal is to create a team that has similar range of capabilities. And on the low end, you want your leaders to be particularly adept to be able to navigate those situations, know what to say, and know what to do in certain situations. The next part of the chapter is something that you'll keep coming back to, and I'll probably do some more content on, but it's the three levels of war: the strategic level, the operational, and the tactical. The highest level of war, like I said before, is the strategic level. It seeks to accomplish a high-level policy of the organization, of the nation, whatever. Tactical level of war is fighting. The hardest level to understand is the operational, which is in between. And that is what links your fights to objectives that eventually get you to your strategic aim or goal. I like to think of the 3 levels of war when I think of different levels of leadership. If you have high level executives or high level management down at the tactical level too often, what you have is everybody solving the same problem and nobody leading the organization to the strategic goal. So one way to think of it might be your tactical level is your front line and your frontline managers and supervisors. Your strategic is your leadership team. And in the middle, you have middle management, maybe your senior managers or directors. Those are the people that are linking all the daily tactical actions to objectives throughout the year to lead you to your goal at the end of the year. Your strategic level is thinking 3 years out. Your tactical people are thinking about how to get through the week and meet the goals or the month, maybe the quarter. And there's going to be some level of overlap, but what you don't want people doing at a high level is habitually being down at the tactical level when what they need to be doing is steering the organization, leading it. Similarly, you don't need your tactical level worried about running the whole company. They're not familiar with the full dynamics. And it's fine to speculate or participate in town halls, but they're not responsible for or familiar with the entire dynamics of the whole company, most likely. And the last thing is, even though somebody is at the tactical level, it can have strategic implications. You might have a key customer, and you may have a tactical level or a frontline level employee that says something or does something that irritates or isolates or otherwise pisses off a key customer. It might have a strategic implication for your whole company. Initiative and response. Most people would say you want a high level of initiative, but you also need to have a response capability. Initiative is when we seek to impose our will on the enemy. It's commonly thought of as the preferred course of action. It's aggressive. Whereas a response generally has a negative aim, a resistance to our opposition. Remember the erosion strategy. We're blocking, we're counterattacking. But the important thing to realize is that a reaction or resistance should ultimately have some sort of offensive aim. What that looks like is a transition to the offense and a counterattack. So you can't always be on the offense. You're going to eventually run out of power, resources to do so. So you go on the defense, but while you're on the defense, you're always thinking of that transition back to the offense. So if your organization is resting, refitting, recuperating, what's the plan to get back into the offense? The other thing is the defense is the more efficient method of war. It requires us to expend less energy. We can trade space for time. And another use is what's called avoiding the culminating point, or the point at which you run out of energy, you run out of resources. You run the team so hard that they can't continue. You start to lose people. That's the culminating point. You go on the defense to avoid it. The way the book describes it is you can't sustain yourself indefinitely. How do you extend your offensive capability? That's where your leaders come in. Can they motivate the team to do a little bit more, to endure for a longer period of time? Weak, ineffective leadership, you're going to be on the defense more often than not. The 2 styles of warfare, attrition and maneuver. Many see war as simply killing, but war is actually convincing the other side, your opposition, to resist no further. Remember the strategy of annihilation or the strategy of erosion. And the definition of attrition is the cumulative destruction of the enemy's combat power. It's generally measured in quantitative terms, and we do this all the time. Things that are easy to count, we make those our measures of success. It might not always be the right way to do it. The opposite of attrition warfare is maneuver warfare. This is where we seek to gain a strategic advantage or a decisive advantage instead of continuing to pursue the cumulative destruction. Maybe price wars are an example of attrition warfare, whereas innovating or coming up with a new product might be an example of maneuver warfare. In maneuver warfare, you're maximizing your advantages and focusing them against your enemy's weaknesses. How often do we focus on our opposition's strengths instead of their weaknesses? And key to maneuver warfare is tempo. Tempo is not simply speed, but tempo is speed in relation to your opposition. Can you decide faster and act faster than your opposition or your enemy? If you can, then you're going to make their decisions irrelevant because you're changing the situation. Combat power is the total destructive force we can bring upon our enemy. Maneuver, tempo, surprise, firepower, maximizing the terrain, climate, weather. All these are different aspects of what makes up combat power. It's not just bullets and bombs. It also includes the effects of good leadership, esprit de corps, high morale, endurance, perseverance. This is why you can't simply just manage a team. You have to lead it. You can't manage somebody into having a high morale. And then we focus the effects of our combat power on some objective. We don't assign people or spend resources without some objective in mind. I mean, we do, but we're wasting our combat power. We're wasting our resources when we do so. Ask yourself if you really established an objective for your business, for your organization, or do people just work on what they like? What you need is cooperation across your team. Cooperation requires an objective, a common objective. Surprise and boldness. When we talk about surprising the enemy, we're talking about disorienting them. It's not simply just handing them something they're not expecting, but it takes place in such a short period of time that they're unable to resist us. Elements of surprise, speed, ambiguity, deception, attacking from the flank. And as the book says, while surprise is important, it's important for us to also to realize that it doesn't last indefinitely. If we're surprising our enemy, we have to capitalize on that. We have to be ready to exploit. If we gain an advantage, how do we exploit it? Are we ready to exploit success? And lastly, surprise is not just simply something that we do. It also involves our enemy's reaction to the surprise and relies on their ability to be surprised. Boldness is another aspect of combat power. And one of the themes in the book Warfighting is that when we act in a bold way, it usually has something to do with exploiting the inherent uncertainty of war, or the friction. If you're able to operate quickly and swiftly and with focus in an ambiguous environment, that's boldness. There's a part in the book that talks about boldness being superior to timidity, but that boldness doesn't always equate to aggressive action. Boldness can be just sustaining, staying on course despite uncertainty, not changing plans. That's a big one. As a leader, can you not change your plans when you don't have that immediate feedback, when things are going tough? That's boldness, to persevere. Two fairly complex topics, or at least they seemed to be complex to me when I was in the Corps, are center of gravity, more so than critical vulnerability. But they're two central topics to warfighting. Center of gravity, the best way that I had heard it described over the years is center of gravity is the glue that holds the enemy together. What do they rely on to exist and to be a cohesive organization? Well, we all have vulnerabilities, and so would our enemy. The enemy will have a critical vulnerability, meaning the one chink in the armor that, if penetrated, can bring the enemy down. The way to think about this in your organization is, what is the one thing that you can't let the competition know? Or where are you most vulnerable? Where's your highest financial risk? And if that knowledge were leaked, that's your critical vulnerability. Well, our goal is to find that in our competition, our enemy. And we attack the critical vulnerability. And the idea there is that it leads to a disintegration of the enemy's center of gravity. They cease to exist in the same way as an organization. And some vulnerabilities are more critical than others. And lastly, to reiterate, we have to be ready to exploit opportunity. It's not enough just to see a local win. We have to anticipate that local win and be ready to take it to the next level. We have to be ready for catastrophic success. The opposite of this would be just to be a more defensive mindset and be glad for local success. So the theory of war, in conclusion, sets us up to talk about the actual conduct of war in the final chapter. Strategic level of war. War seeks to achieve the highest level aim of our team, our organization, or our nation. And you have three levels of war: strategic, operational, and tactical. Tactical being the fighting, the fights, strategic being the goal, and the operational being linking all those fights to objectives that take us to our goal. Initiative, response, annihilation, erosion, maneuver, attrition, surprise and boldness, center of gravity, critical vulnerability, all aspects of the theory of war to weave into the actual conduct, which we'll talk about next. If you're looking to bring this type of thinking into your organization, happy to help. Information's in the profile. Get a hold of me anytime.